Welcome back to episode 2 of Musings from the Mountain. My name is Zach Anderson, and with me, of course, is Keenan Cummings. But we have a special guest here, the host of the Locked on Nittany Lions podcast, Zach Seiko. Zach, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here. And Keenan and I just want to ask you some questions to start about Penn State. You know, this big matchup coming up on Saturday. First, let's start out with this quarterback situation for you guys, because West Virginia's in the same boat. We want to hear a little bit about what there is to know.
Yeah, as of Tuesday, August 29th, Penn State and West Virginia are still in that same boat. There is no starting quarterback for the Nittany Lions. James Franklin, I was waiting. I thought there was going to be the opening statement. He did this 1 year ago at this point in time with Purdue, where he said, "Oh, Drew Aller is the number 2 quarterback," and everybody went absolutely nuts. Okay, so I thought in the opening statement here, okay, let's have a little bit of deja vu, and that James Franklin would announce either Drew Aller or it's going to be Drew. But the chance of Bo Prabula, with the way that he's talking about these quarterbacks, it honestly seems like Jackson Smolik has an outside shot to be the starter at this point. He just, it feels like it's business. And then off the cuff, he'll talk about the third string true freshman, but besides the point. So yeah, Aller's going to be the starting quarterback. I think it also it's a little bit of fun chess, right? James Franklin takes these historic rivalries to be he takes them very seriously. And if Neil Brown's going to do this with his quarterback situation, even though it feels like everybody knows that it's going to be Garrett Green, then why can't James Franklin do it with Drew Aller and Bo Prabula, his quarterbacks?
It's gotten kind of ridiculous, hasn't it? The depth chart Cold War kind of thing. Not just here, not with these two schools across the country. You know, Neil Brown mentioned yesterday in his press conference that, he'd like to see an NFL model someday, so everyone's on the same page. He basically flat out admitted that he hadn't released the depth chart yet because Penn State hadn't. Yep. So I think it's one of those issues where I don't think it's going to affect the outcome of the game. I think just like last year against Pitt for West Virginia, both teams know who's going to start this game. Mm-hmm. It's really just for this point, it's more smoke and mirrors than anything. But offensively, obviously, 2 very, very good running backs, 2 incredible true freshman seasons a year ago. Yep. Outside of them, you can speak to them a little bit and what they bring to the table. What else does West Virginia need to worry about on this offense?
I would say the tight ends and the 2 starting wide receivers, at least Keandre Lambert-Smith. It's kind of, I think West Virginia's biggest problem stopping Penn State offensively is going to be, can you keep up with the firepower? Okay. Nicholas Singleton can hit you with the home run, and then fat man Katron Allen will literally hit you. He will try to run through you. So that thunder and lightning combination, coupled with Penn State's best offensive line in recent memory in the past decade, I've had people say since the 90s for Penn State. Now, I can't attest to, I've only been watching Penn State football since the early 2000s, but to go all the way back and to say that, the vintage Penn State football fans say, hey, this offensive line for the Nittany Lions is one of the best that we can even remember, then that's saying something. West Virginia's defense, for what it's worth, isn't exactly the best. So kind of keeping up with that star power. And honestly, West Virginia's run game is very respectable. I think that offensive line is top 10 in the nation. But the fact that you're now getting a taste of your own medicine, I don't know how often the Mountaineers really get to see that year in and year out. The Big 12 is a little more spread, pass friendly, pass happy, and Penn State's going to try to ground and pound and run the rock.
Do you think this is a more 1A, 1B situation in the backfield, or do you think the ceiling's only started for Singleton in a sense?
I think both of them, if I can make a comparison, and some people said you're crazy for making this, other people are like, you know what, he's on to something here. This is Reggie Bush and Lendell White all over again, and USC coming to the Big Ten to play against Penn State. I hope people get to see that in their junior seasons and really get to make that comparison. Singleton still has yet to, we have to see how he is as a pass catcher, because I know that's what's holding him back from the Reggie Bush comparison ultimately. But these two have the exact same dynamic. They're both future first-round picks. Is Singleton necessarily a top 5 or a top 3 like a Reggie Bush? Who knows? He's still got a couple more years to play, right? But he's definitely, I think, a top 15. And then Katron Allen's a surefire first-rounder if he ends up in the top 30, top 25 in that range. But those guys are both first-round picks in a future NFL draft.
So Coach Brown's been talking a lot, especially yesterday. He talked about the defensive front, the front 7 really. He's talking about Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter. Tell us a little bit about those guys. And I mean, it's going to be a great matchup between West Virginia's offensive line and that group. So tell me what you think of those guys and how West Virginia can maybe slow them down, if at all.
I mean, this is going to be a good test for Penn State to see how they adjust to the running game, because you have flashbacks to 2021 Illinois and then 2022 Michigan, where those teams just ran all over Penn State. And that's why they lost those games, because they couldn't control the pace of the game, and the defense didn't really offer any resistance there. So now I think the test is going to be on the interior of the defensive line. As far as stopping Chop Robinson, you don't want to get into passing situations, because Chop Robinson last year played at 240 pounds, and going into this season, they said he's up to 255, and they say he's slightly faster on his 40 time. How do you add 15 pounds of weight and you end up trimming your 40 time? Chop Robinson's a first round pick in a future NFL draft as well. So is Abdul Carter, with the way that everything projects. Penn State, a lot of it has to do with scheme as well, combined with the talent. So Manny Diaz is going to be able to find creative ways to get Abdul Carter in space so that you have a hard time blocking him, so that he is a nuisance to what you're trying to do. Okay. He floats. He'll drop back into coverage. He's the freelancer. He's just going to do whatever Manny Diaz tells him to. And if you already have to double team Chop Robinson, you're probably going to have to maybe chip in Adisa Isaac. And then that's where Abdul Carter comes into play, because he's the assassin at that point, because you're focused on all the things going around on the line of scrimmage.
How good is this defense? Obviously you won't know, nobody will know until it plays out, but on paper, is this as good as a defense as James Franklin has had?
Yeah, it is. I would say that Penn State has been very lucky to have the defenses they've had. I mean, they've earned them, right? Brent Pry was a really good defensive coordinator for a long time, for almost the past decade. Manny Diaz to fill that void immediately. Like, there was no drop off. There was a change in scheme, slight changes in scheme, but Penn State maintains that 4-3 attacking style defense. And at least over the past 5 years, they've been top 10 in the nation. I think this is a top 5 defense when all's said and done, just because Penn State finally has that turnover prowess to go along with, okay, hey, they're pretty stingy at keeping teams out of the end zone when they get to the red zone. And then now you got to factor in the turnover and the blitz happiness of Manny Diaz to go along. And they have the players to fit that. They recruited the players. They found the transfers necessary to fit with what Manny Diaz wants to do.
Are there any concerns? You go up and down the board, offensively, defensively. I mean, this is the number 7 team in the nation. It checks as a lot of box preseasons. Yeah. What are the concerns, if there are any, on both sides of the ball?
How fast can Drew Aller grow up? Or the pressure, or the sky's the limit apparently, but not everybody lived up to those expectations. It's no disrespect to Christian Hackenberg or Anthony Morelli, but Penn State's track record with 5-star quarterbacks in the modern era isn't exactly good. And everyone's talking about Heisman, national champion, Big Ten championship, national championship, college football playoff in the 4-team. The 12-team is a little easier because you have more teams, but everyone wants to get to the 4-team. So something where it's 10-2 isn't exactly going to get it done anymore. The expectations are just higher. So is a true sophomore quarterback ready to handle all of that? I hope so, but you just don't know until you see it. All the intangibles are there, but we haven't psychoanalyzed Drew Aller to this point. If I'm looking on the defense, I would say the depth at secondary in the cornerback spot, not enough people are talking about that, and I'm not exactly sure why. Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, and Daquan Hardy, as good as a starting group that you will find for your first 3, especially Kalen King. He'll be a first-round pick in the NFL draft next year. And Johnny Dixon is supposed to be, not a compliment, is supposed to be able to challenge the level that Kalen King brings. But then after that, like, knock on wood, right? I don't want to say, okay, well, what happens if they don't play? But seriously, what happens if they aren't available to play? It's a lot of young, unproven players. True freshmen got announced that they're going to burn their red shirts, essentially, and a lot of them were guys at the cornerback position. So that's telling me that Penn State, I hope those true freshmen can step up, but God forbid that Penn State loses either Kalen King or Johnny Dixon, and even Daquan Hardy, because there's going to be not a significant drop off, but something that you're just going to have to keep an eye on if any of those guys have to miss time.
I was 7 years old the last 2 times these 2 teams played, but obviously a lot of people remember the rivalry, playing annually. Yeah. What's kind of the buzz, around State College right now? How do people look at this game? Are people excited that, that it's back at least for 2 years, but what's the buzz? Or is it just another game to a lot of people now because it hasn't been played for so long?
it doesn't have the exact. I mean, I think people are focused on more the Big Ten expansion. I hear more about USC, Oregon, Washington than I do West Virginia. Sure, you're going to get that vintage. It's like, well, we need to play Pitt every year. Well, we should factor West Virginia back in. There's people that look at this game and say, hey, why isn't Penn State favored a little more? It's just there isn't the, at least in my circle, no one is considering West Virginia to win this game. Okay, it's all Penn State, and it's just a matter of by how much. The Mountaineers probably have good bulletin board material, but I think Penn State does as well, because they're when you look at where they are, there's people that still see this team as the 9-3 group, and they're just not. They need to be in the 11-1, 12-0 conversation, and not enough people are giving them that credit. But I think if you're looking in the Penn State circle of things, West Virginia is not getting enough credit either, because I do think this is a better team than advertised. I don't think they're bottom feeders in the Big 12 this season, but that's not how a lot of Nittany Lion fans look at it. They look at the 20 points and they're like, okay, Penn State should probably be favored by 30.
So this is kind of to your point that you said earlier, Zach. Coach Brown and offensive coordinator Chad Scott from West Virginia, they said in their press conference yesterday that this is week one for everybody. This is week one for Penn State. This is week one for West Virginia, of course. So do you think that inexperience on both sides is going to play a factor Saturday?
I think it will. I think there's a lot of things factoring into. Penn State is going to have a new quarterback with, yes, the same offense, and an offense that is a little more tailored for Drew. Like, this offense is Mike Yurcich wants to, now they recruit Sean Clifford was the quarterback of the past, where it was the Trace McSorley, a little more condensed to run first. And then you saw Clifford kind of move into this more, stay in the pocket, run when you have to, not when you want to, like when you really need to. And that's what Mike Yurcich. So when you see the offense change, it's more so around the offensive coordinator. So I think that, I mean, Garrett Green does have starting experience. There's not, and yeah, I know there's a change at offensive coordinator for West Virginia, but he's been on the staff, and West Virginia has a really good ground game to lean on. Coupling that with the new clock changes, how they don't stop after the first down, we could just see something that's a little more lower scoring. So I don't know that Penn State's going to like that trend. Mike Yurcich has talked about that, Penn State's OC, that's going to shrink games a little bit, and you're not going to get as many plays in. You're going to lose about almost, I'd say a little over a half a dozen to a dozen plays for both teams. And with the way that West Virginia wants to shrink this game, they already want to shorten this game to begin with. You don't want to get into a shootout with Penn State. I don't care who the quarterback is in this case, with all the offensive line, the running backs, the tight ends, the wide receivers that they do have, that they do boast. You really don't want to get into that kind of matchup with Penn State. You want to try to hold on to the football, win time of possession, and see if you can maybe force a turnover from a first-time starter.
From our perspective, we know what West Virginia has to do if they're going to pull off an upset. Obviously, you need to be able to run the football, you need to be able to stop the run. You know, classic keys if you're going to win on the road, not turn over the football, not make mistakes, not beat yourself. What does Penn State need to do just to come out and win this game? And obviously, they're the number 7 team in the nation. They're expected to win this game. What do they have to avoid, if they want to fall in that trap?
Exactly what I just said and what we've talked about. Okay, you want to stop the run. I know it's very basic here. West Virginia is going to have a good ground game all season long because of the offensive line. Garrett Green's a dual threat, presuming that he's the starter, right? And all the running backs that they have. Penn State has multiple running backs they can turn to. I know the Mountaineers do as well. At Penn State, they know that if you can force West Virginia into obvious passing situations, that's when the turnovers come. I feel like Garrett Green, if he's in a 3rd and long situation, he's going to get sacked and have a fumble, or he's going to throw a pick or two. And that's where Penn State's going to make make the difference on defense by forcing those turnovers and giving the offense such a short field. And what plagued Penn State in 2020 and 2021 is the fact that they couldn't close out games before. They had to throw a lot. They had to keep the game going, extend the game a little bit by putting the football in the air. Now you don't have to do that because you have not 1, but 2 All-America type of running backs. And I'd even go as far to say that both of them should be in the Heisman conversation. If you gave any of those running backs, if you gave either of those 2 the workload that a lot of these other Heisman contenders have, Singleton and Allen would shatter them based on the averages in production. They just don't get the workload to go along with it. So everyone says, well, they can't be Heisman contenders because they had fewer stats. They had lower stats than everybody else. They also had half the carries. And if you doubled that, those were Heisman stats based on the averages.
Last one, we'll get you out here. Okay. Obviously, the spread is pretty significant. is Penn State going to win this game? And if so, do you have a prediction, or you can just say if you think they cover or not?
I think the score is 35-13. I can't quite remember what the total is. I know it is in the upper 40s, maybe even into the 50s. I think that, and this score would trend. I would trend that it's a lower than the over than it is going over the total, because both teams are going to run the football. Penn State has a lot. I know about the 1-0 mentality for James Franklin, and that's the agenda, right? That's the brand. 1-0 every single week. You put everything into this one game. But Penn State's got to think about, that's just how they're looking at West Virginia. Like, I don't, I'm not trying to be disrespectful on your show, but they look at this as, okay, this is a road bump. Yes, we got to get a win in week 1 and learn more about our team, but we have Ohio State and Michigan. And that's what really separates the season for a make or break, not West Virginia. I know you don't want to look past any opponents and say, like, well, they're just inferior, so we can do whatever we want. But Penn State's going to have a little more of a condensed game plan rather than something that's totally out there. And I think Neil Brown, because there is the hot seat, there are the rumors, he's in his 5th season. It's time for him to make a turn or get out, right? And I think he's going to lay it all out there when it comes to scheme, playbook, maybe some trick plays going for it on 4th down, maybe when he shouldn't. So I think the Mountaineers are going to lay it all out there, but Penn State, I think the defense will force probably 3 turnovers, somewhere 2 interceptions, 1 fumble, and then it'll be pretty simple. I don't think Drew Aller is going to do a whole lot in week 1. I think that they're going to try to save him and let him get more experience through Delaware, UMass, and those other games to try to prepare. This isn't the time to show what Drew Aller can do. This is about getting a win and starting off the season 1-0.
I lied to you. I had one more thing. This is my first time going up there for a night game. What kind of atmosphere can people expect going up? That haven't been up there in a long time. Obviously, everybody knows, the stadium, how big it is, how many fans are in there, the whiteout. What is that like?
You're going to get you'll get Happy Valley hospitality. You're not going to get, and you're going to get your rowdy fans, right? There's that select group, but no one's going to look at you sideways. Nobody's going to see you as a true enemy. People are going to welcome you into Beaver Stadium because they want that dynamic of, like, okay, hey, this is a good, respectable opponent. So nobody's going to be disrespectful in any sort of manner here when it comes to that. As far as the atmosphere, I mean, the atmosphere is great. That's why college football, ESPN, everybody advertises the whiteout, 107,000. Like, that's why it's always this annual thing. And West Virginia is going into what should be considered essentially a whiteout under good temperatures, good conditions for a football game. I can't remember the last time that Penn State hosted a home opener week 1 at night like this in prime time. So you're getting perfect weather. It's the helmet stripe game, which means the entire stadium is going to be wearing white, except for about the 50. Look at the 50-yard line, and they'll be in blue to kind of match the Penn State helmets. The atmosphere is great. It's one of a kind. You're getting something as close to the whiteout as possible. And Penn State fans typically are loud for these kinds of games, whether it's Auburn, West Virginia. Anytime there's kind of your non-traditional opponent in this modern day of college football, you're going to get a little more juice going into Beaver Stadium.
Well, thank you, Zach. We appreciate you coming on Musings from the Mountains. We appreciate your insight, and we'll see how it goes Saturday.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
All right, well, Keenan, that was a lot of information to take in. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that clearly, obviously Penn State media is a little bit different than Penn State the team, but you can tell the vibe there, at least, is they think they're going to win this football game. And, if history is any indication, there's no reason Penn State shouldn't feel confident they're going to win this football game. They're 48-9-2 against West Virginia all time. West Virginia last beat them in 1988. To put things into perspective, I'm not an old man, but I was 3 years old. I mean, that's a long time ago. Penn State's number 7 in the nation. This is supposed to be one of their better teams on both sides of the ball, as long as their quarterback situation's ironed out, which is what he talked about. I think we all know who it's going to be. I like the Cold War depth chart battle going on right now between these two programs, as ridiculous as it is. Although it's not quite as ridiculous as Indiana not releasing their starting kicker. But still, I think that, there's some gamesmanship that goes with that. But, West Virginia, in a sense, has nothing to lose in this game. They're heavy underdogs. No one outside of that building believes they have a chance in this game. And there's a lot of reasons for that. West Virginia struggled last year. Penn State returns a lot of firepower. It's going to be a ridiculous environment. This is going to be 100,000 plus like Texas, but a much more rowdy environment compared to, Texas is more tame. I've been down there before, and you don't think it's 100,000. You can get loud every now and then, but not necessarily. But this is a rivalry game that West Virginia's played a lot. This will be the 60th meeting between the two, which it's hard to think. They haven't played since 1992, and they've played 60 times.
Wow.
But yeah, it'll be very interesting to kind of see how this turns out. It's a big opportunity for West Virginia. That's not lost on anybody. Neil Brown mentioned it. The players mentioned it in interviews. And I think we're going to really see. I'm just going to be honest. I don't think West Virginia goes in and wins this football game. I haven't felt that at any point. I'd be lying to anybody if I said otherwise. Is it possible? Absolutely. That's why I asked earlier about possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I do not think it will happen, but what I do think can happen in this game is much like West Virginia, a few years back when they played Alabama down in the Georgia Dome.
Mm-hmm.
You can take some confidence away from this if you go out there and play well, give yourself a chance to win, and keep in the game. So I think that's going to be key for me. This is a building block in a sense. And no, I'm not punting this. This isn't a lost opportunity. West Virginia has a chance to win this game. I'm just telling you, as a journalist that covers them, I do not think they will. But when you look at the schedule, you don't need to beat Penn State to have a pretty good year.
Mm-hmm.
What you need to do is beat the teams you should beat. So this will be interesting to see, if it is Garrett Green that gets to start, how he plays, how the offense works in general, what changes are there on defense. And I do think that one thing that's going completely under the radar, the changes they have made on defense with personnel and with scheme. I think it's going to be a better group than it was last year. It's hard not to be, but I do think it's going to be a much better group than it was last year. So I'm interested to see it. I do think Penn State will win. I do think it's lower scoring. I agree with Zach, who was on here. I think it'll probably be much to the same tune. I would probably say 20 to 38, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Penn State will win by around 2 touchdowns, maybe 2 touchdowns and a field goal by the time it's said and done. But any thoughts you have?
I agree with you on that, but I kind of wanted to go back to what you said about Brown putting everything on the line. In a game like this, it's kind of open playbook, in my opinion. You throw what you have at Penn State, and you really got on both sides of the ball. And you got to force some turnovers. You got to force the freshman quarterback into making mistakes for West Virginia to have a chance. And, I feel like Brown has had that same sentiment, same with Chad Scott yesterday. They were talking about how they're going to be aggressive on 4th down. They're going to try to be efficient on 1st and 2nd down so they can avoid 3rd and long situations, just like Zach said earlier on the podcast. If West Virginia gets into those third and long situations, that could really be just a tough situation for a quarterback like Green, no offense to him, to convert. So something like that is West Virginia needs to avoid. And I have to agree with you though on the 2 touchdowns. I think West Virginia goes up there. It's a tough environment. You can't beat that environment. They're not going to see anything like it in the Big 12, in my opinion. And you go up there, it's going to be a tough game for a lot of inexperienced guys on both sides of the ball. I think it's going to be tough for West Virginia to win. I think Penn State will probably get it by 2 touchdowns, but it's exciting. It's still exciting to bring the rivalry back, even though I wasn't even close to being alive whenever the last game was played. And I saw someone on Twitter bringing up the game from 1955 that West Virginia won, and I thought that was kind of funny. So it's exciting, at least in the West Virginia circle, it's exciting for this game to be back.
Now, I think as long as West Virginia can run the football, stop the run, not turn the ball over, not have any dumb mistakes, they can win this game. And yes, it's possible. There's upsets every year, especially this first week. There's always a team or two that you place a little bit too high of expectations on. Maybe it takes a while for them to gel. Who's to say that's not Penn State this year? I think their defense is very good, and I think that's where it makes it hard on West Virginia. And offensively, West Virginia's going to have to break some tackles, as Neil said, and generate some plays that they've struggled to generate at times. So it'll be interesting. 7:30 p.m. kick, NBC, prime time. We'll be there in attendance. We'll have all your recap, all your coverage. We'll be running a game preview this week, as well as other stories that we've been working on. So look forward to that. We'll have our typical post-game coverage. We'll get a video together after the game to kind of recap what we saw and go from there. But as you've come to expect, Lots of content coming your way. Lots of stuff to talk about. Football season is back. Let's celebrate that. That should have been my opening line, but we had a guest.
That's
It's
true.
back. Yes, my fantasy draft is in the books. I know you don't want to hear about that, anybody, but that usually is the sign to me that football season's it's here. So we're in game week now. Get excited. A lot of coverage coming, and West Virginia hopefully goes out there and puts on a pretty good show. But thank you for tuning in once again. This has been another edition of Musings from the Mountains.